Tonight, an exclusive new report from CNN's Carl Bernstein. According to sources familiar with hundreds of highly classified phone calls with foreign leaders, President Trump was so repeatedly unprepared, outplayed by adversaries, and hostile toward traditional allies that several senior U.S. officials concluded the president himself posed a danger to national security. Sources say the calls convinced former top Trump deputies, including National Security Advisors H.R. McMaster and John Bolton, Defense Secretary James Mattis, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, and Chief of Staff John Kelly that the president was delusional. And several sources noted he often pursued goals aligned with his own agenda rather than the national interest. Carl Bernstein joins us now with more on this jaw-dropping new report. And Carl, you write that one source said these calls were such an abomination that if members of Congress knew the content, even Republicans would not have confidence in the president. What were his calls with Russian President Vladimir Putin like?
On his calls with Putin, he was almost slavishly seeking Putin's approval, trying to prop himself up. Trump is a great businessman, demeaning his predecessors, George Bush and Barack Obama, in foul terms, vulgar language, calling them incompetent. But now that Trump was there, that they could deal directly. But the overall tenor of the calls, as well as the specifics of them, show the President of the United States, in terms of allies, bullying them, almost sadistically dealing with women on the call, namely Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, and Theresa May, the Prime Minister of Great Britain. Those calls with those women are described in almost sadistic terms by the sources. A spokesman for the German embassy here in the United States confirmed that those calls are very aggressive and problematic. So what we have is a president very much like we saw, the sources said, in the coronavirus briefings, out of control, facts be damned, attacking people, all about himself, but also unable to handle the most basic national security matters that the President of the United States is expected to handle competently with foreign leaders. And
it's consistent with the behavior we've seen throughout this presidency, Carl. You report that Turkish President Erdogan enjoys an almost direct line to President Trump, calling the White House during one period at least twice a week. What was Erdogan after?
First of all, he didn't just call the White House. He would find Trump on the golf course and get through to him because Trump had given standing orders that Erdogan should be put through, which was to the consternation of his national security aides, because you're supposed to, in ordinary presidencies, the president is briefed by his aides. They're in the room with him when he takes calls from foreign leaders to make sure that there's no foul up. It's understood that the leaders on the other side, that their security services are recording these calls, and that's one of the problems, with especially the calls with Erdogan and with Putin, that the Russians and the Turks have these actual calls in which the president's conduct is really open to question. And if they were ever heard, I'm told, it would really cause great consternation to anyone who heard them. But in Erdogan's case, it was thought by national security aides that somehow the Turkish security services had found out the president's schedule, when Erdogan could get through to him. And of course, the most grievous thing that I was told on almost all of the calls are those discussions having to do with the United States pulling its forces out of Syria at Erdogan's urging, thereby setting up the situation where our allies, the Kurds, our allies in Iraq and in Syria, would be subject to slaughter by Erdogan, who has been after the Kurds for all of his time as the Turkish leader. There's historic animosity between the Kurds and other Turkish people. And this was something that Vladimir Putin wanted. As one of the sources said, Trump gave away the store in Syria, partly on these phone calls with Erdogan.
And Carl, but the president wasn't always so deferential, and this is an important part of your story. You write that Trump's calls with female leaders were near sadistic, quote, near sadistic. He demeaned and denigrated them, according to reporting, telling UK Prime Minister Theresa May she was weak, and German Chancellor Angela Merkel that she was stupid. What was the reaction on the other side?
In Theresa May's case, according to the sources that I spoke with, she was very flustered. She was agitated. She was really very difficult for her to handle the call. And in fact, the intimidation that was put forth in the call by Trump was intended. It was intended to shake her up because the president was furious that the Brits, that Theresa May's plans for Brexit were not the same that he wanted. He called her weak. He called her spineless. And also the whole question of our closest allies not paying a larger share of NATO and other defense dues has preoccupied the president, and with some justification. Certainly a larger share probably should be paid by the allies. But in these calls, he raises the question with the allies, including Macron, including Theresa May and Merkel, in such vicious personal terms, to the exclusion of the more important, larger questions of the Western alliance: human rights, defense, all of the questions, health, that are so important to these allies that have been allies for 75 years. And instead, he has this grievance about paying their fair share, and he becomes like a whipping boy, as somebody put it, but especially with the women. There's really abusive to these two women in these calls.